morning and welcome to Viewpoint, your program with personalities, politicians, and perspectives. Today we have a great personality and a perspective into the past. And I think we'd be really anxious to get into that because it's history. You know, Judith K. and listeners, Old Bill was an average student in history. I just didn't get into it until I got Anna Lee Bailoff to teach history at Lincoln College, and she made it come alive. And teachers can do that.
Oh, yes.
You know, we all have our favorite teachers. So we're going to go back in history a little bit today. First are kudos. I think Judith K., with permission of management this morning, who's standing here ready with the cutoff switch, kudos to my brother John Franklin Gossett, who made it to 91 today. He's out in...
That's his younger brother.
Oh, she had to mention that.
Well, you're just a miracle, Bill. You are just a miracle.
He's in Surprise. He's surprised me. He's in Surprise, Arizona. And it's kind of interesting because he and I did make our 90s, and we didn't have any of that longevity in our male side of our family. My father was 50, his brother was 51, and their father was 49. So we kind of feel...
They were awfully young.
We feel pretty special to have made the age we do. So anyway... Jack can't hear this, but he'll pick it up on the computer as he watches Viewpoint, which he does. So happy birthday, old fella. Now let's get down to some serious business.
Yeah, this is a barn burner. I'm so glad that you talked to Bill about doing this, Bill. Everybody in this room is named Bill except Jim and I.
When he said old Bill a minute ago, I really didn't know who he was talking about. I'm glad that got clarified.
But you had an inkling.
Well, Bill is a history buff, and he has looked into the history of this area, all the little towns that we have around central Illinois here. And in the way back when, the Ku Klux Klan was very active in this part of the world. And he's looked up many things that you have these things, I hope, on display in the Atlanta Museum.
Yes.
Because if we forget our past, we're doomed to repeat it, they tell me, and wouldn't that be the worst thing you could think of?
The interesting thing about the Klan is that, you know, we heard about it as we grew up as youngsters and so forth, and we knew they were whizzes under the sheets. Other than that, why, we didn't know anything about them. But to realize documented history, which we have in front of us here this morning, that they were in these small towns like Atlanta, McLean, probably Broadwell, Beeston, and Burtonview.
Sure.
But they were really a prolific operation insofar as membership is concerned. So, Mr. Thomas, let's just pass the baton to you and
okay.
Let you go with the Ku Klux Klan history here.
Okay. Yeah, forgive me if I want to start with a little bit of context first.
You take the program.
Remember, former junior high school social studies history teacher, so that never goes away. That never goes away.
You're branded with that.
I'm branded with it. But even before I do the context, I was trying to figure out a way to explain, well, why did I even want to talk about this today? And the answer to that is, I can distinctly remember a number of years ago when we were in the process of moving all of the Atlanta Museum artifacts out of the basement of the library over into the new building across the street. And we were cataloging and inventorying everything, and lo and behold, we come across these 3 sheets, 3 uniforms, if you will. And it was a man's, a woman's, and a child's KKK robe.
I never knew that they would went down as far as the children.
And that had an impact on me, too. And I thought, oh my goodness, how in the world did these end up in Atlanta, Illinois? Why would they be here? because like many other folks, I grew up, I knew about the Klan, I was taught about it in school, but if you said Ku Klux Klan to me, I would think Deep South, extreme racism against African Americans. Those would be the thoughts that came
Those
to
are
mind.
the things, the automatic things that come to mind.
Yes. So I did a little digging because I thought, well, I know that isn't the case here in Atlanta. I've never read anything about racism per se in Atlanta or even heard about it. So I did some research, and lo and behold, there have been 3 different versions of the Klan in the United States.
I never knew that.
No.
First one, the Klan originated after the Civil War, and it was created by a group of Southerners who specifically wanted to keep blacks oppressed. Okay? Made sense. And that lasted for a number of years. But then it sort of withered away. It revived in the 1920s, and it had so much more to do with an anti-immigrant, anti-Catholic, anti-drinking, pro-morality stance than specifically against African Americans. And that's the Klan that ended up being present in Atlanta, in Beeson, in McLean, in Lincoln, etc. I did a little more research, and believe it or not, Indiana had 30 to 40% of its entire population joined the Klan in the 1920s. That's how prevalent it was. Lexington, Illinois, a town of 1,300 people back in the 20s, 400 members.
Really?
Yes. And just step back a minute and think about what it was the Klan was communicating and using to attract members. We want to be against prohibition. They were not against prohibition. They were in favor of prohibition.
Sure.
Very strong prohibition organization. We wanted high morals. We wanted to support Protestantism, and we were worried about all of the Catholics and immigrants coming to this country, because there was a huge wave of Catholic immigration in the 20s.
That's the entirely different take. Most of us, when we think of the KKK, it automatically comes to our mind they were a racist operation.
Yes.
And it runs a bunch of miserable people that they were, because they were just for segregation now. Segregation is, as that governor said, miserable piece of work that he was. Nobody ever delved into that. Well, somebody has, of course, but to realize that it was anti-Catholic, anti-booze, anti-drinking, very much in favor of prohibition.
And very much their sort of signature phrase was 100% American. Okay.
Yeah.
We're
So
going to rally.
born and raised here, period.
Oh, yes.
That's it.
Yes, we're going to rally around the flag and the cross. And that's what we're going to use to attract people. Now, interestingly, I am not here to judge. I was trained to be a historian, to teach it, and we try to figure out why. Yeah. My job isn't to judge. But
as the Dragnet guy says, just the facts, ma'am.
Yes. All I'll say is, whether it's African Americans or Catholics, oppression is oppression.
Oh, absolutely, unequivocally. Okay. I mean, anybody with a lick of common sense understands
but that's the only sort of semi-judgmental thing I'll say.
When those who had known that somebody had died and made them queen, so they got to decide who was acceptable, why did they decide that it was the Catholics who were unacceptable rather than, for instance, the Presbyterians or the Episcopalians or somebody?
I hate to say it, it's a rather simplistic answer, Judy, but many Protestants had a problem with the Catholic Church because it's a hierarchy controlled by one man.
Came from the Rome.
The Pope.
Came from Rome.
And if they saw that as being undemocratic against the American way of life, if you will. As odd as that sounds now in this more tolerant context in which we live today, but that's the primary reason. And they were different. The immigrants coming over were different. And we all have this seemingly ingrown or inbred thing about, if you're different from me, I don't know. Yeah. I don't know about you.
Yeah, and those folks that came over in those times, they were coming from the old countries, they say, strong Catholicism in Italy, and we had thousands of Italian immigrants come here, and they brought that with them. That was ingrained in that. Was just a part of their whole makeup.
Right.
And who should criticize that?
Yeah. But it manifested itself in this revival of the Klan in the 1920s, and then that too died away. I think one of the primary reasons was, remember, the 1920s were an extremely prosperous time in the United States. Everybody was doing really well. The stock market was running high. Lots and lots of folks were making lots and lots of money. And then when the Depression hit, you had a lot more on your mind to worry about in terms of just keeping yourself employed and your family fed than dressing up in a robe and supporting an organization such as the KKK. Now, that's a simplified answer, but I think that's one of the key factors why it died away.
In order for me to understand the conversation, we're going to have to keep it simplified. It's just hard to believe that folks got so wrapped up. And that was those folks were, the Klan, they were clannish. And I remember my father's business partner, my mother found out that he was a member of the Klan, and my father was furious. And it didn't help that partnership at all, I can tell you that.
Yeah.
The only other little piece of context that I want to offer before we talk about some of these specific things is the fact that I said this second version of the Klan died away. Well, it's back. You don't have your eyes blinded or your eyes shut. Yep. There's a very active Klan again in this country, and it's very racist. So it's reemerged again.
In its own form.
Yep.
Are you saying that it involves black people?
No, I'm saying it's anti-African American. Look at what happened out in Charlottesville, Virginia a couple years ago when there was the big demonstration. And those were right-wing thugs. I don't know that they were Klan members, but it's part of that whole movement. And again, it's very, you're different from us, so we don't want you here. We don't like you. And that includes if you're not white. We don't want you.
648-5510. Our guest this morning, Mr. William Thomas, a figure of some prominence up here in Atlanta. I first knew Billy, as I've said ad nauseum almost, when he was superintendent of the schools, and my grandchildren were going to the Atlanta grade school.
Thank you for that promotion. I was only principal, but I appreciate the promotion to superintendent.
Well, but the money didn't go
The
with
money
it.
will
appreciate
follow
that.
that.
Yeah.
So, the subject this morning is history. Ku Klux Klan. A name that kind of just slipped off the radar, thank goodness. And due to Billy's interest in history, we find it was more active in here in this part of central Illinois than anybody ever dreamed. You normally think of that being a southern organization, based with the Southerners.
Do you see parallels today at all? Insofar as the market was doing real well, people, by and large, are doing pretty well financially. And we're discussing build the wall, don't build the wall. No, we want the Mexican people to come, and we'll even give them free health care, etc., and so forth. Do you see any parallels there?
Judy, I think there are some similarities, but it really, the more I've delved into what the Klan was like here in the Midwest in the 1920s, the more surprised I am at how prevalent it was and how many people actually supported it. And yes, there's a group today. We all know there's a real right-wing group in existence today, but I don't see the mainstream of society and the mainstream of folks in our communities supporting that extreme side of things, unlike what happened in the 1920s. Almost all it was very common for all the prominent businessmen and church leaders and other civic leaders
put on a sheet and go out and pray.
Yes,
and
yes,
they were
to be involved in the Klan. Well, I can't speak for them. I don't know if they were proud, but they supported it, and it was common enough that it got written up in the newspaper all the time. And that's what took me aback when I started to do some research on this. Oh my gosh, they're writing front page articles about what the Klan was doing. You want an example?
Yeah,
okay,
please.
Let me give you an example. From June 20th, 1924, and all of these articles, with the exception of one, come from the Atlanta Argus, the weekly newspaper that was in town for many, many years. And I have one article from the Lincoln Evening Courier that I came across. I just didn't have much time to do the researching. But here it is, June 20th, 1924. It's under the little column heading McLean, because, they'd report on all the events happening in the various towns.
Sure.
And just a little paragraph that says, the Ku Klux Klan will hold a demonstration in the park on Thursday evening beginning at 7:30. There will be speaking and fireworks during the evening. And it's
1924.
Yeah, 1924. That's common enough that it just shows you, nobody gave that a second thought.
That was a part of the web of the communities in those days.
Yes, exactly. Here's a very interesting one. September 26, 1924. This is a big box ad that appeared in the paper. KKK. Free barbecue and picnic, Tuesday, September 30th, Lincoln, Illinois. Commencing at noon, night session. National speakers on the Klan.
Oofta.
Monster parade at 7:30. Place, east end of Wyatt Avenue. All are invited, Klansmen especially. You know where the east end of Wyatt Avenue is?
Yeah.
Yes, where you go
out where the high
from
school
home.
is.
Yeah.
So they needed a large space in order to hold the event.
I just can't imagine that.
Think of the impact on kids 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, run around, watch these guys run around in sheets. That had to be a terrible impact on these youngsters.
Right.
And then they go to them to ask Daddy, what's the KKK, Daddy?
Right.
How far north was it this active, would you say?
Judy, I really don't know. Again, because I haven't done enough research. I'd love to find out. I'd love to spend some more time figuring out the why of all of this, and that would include, how far widespread was it? But I only know about Illinois and a little bit about Indiana from my
Candace
research.
out with her Norwegian accent got much affection by that up there in the northern part of Minnesota. I tend to agree that those old boys took
I don't know.
the
I don't want to make light, but it's cold out there. You got to wear a coat, so it's kind of hard to do the sheet and the coat maybe at the same time.
Well, and you'd kind of destroy the effect of the sheet after you put your sheepskin coat on.
Right, you do.
Yeah, but I don't know that it was that prevalent up north. Of course, I don't know differently either. Somebody could tell me.
I didn't know here until all of a sudden I was in the basement of
There
the
you
library
were.
doing some cataloging for the
Out of
museum.
sight, out of mind.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
I know some of these ads and some of these articles in the newspapers you brought up, and the side issue on that, looking at those papers of the 1924, 25, 26, is the advertising, the display advertising in those newspapers of that era.
Yes.
Where did they get the money to put on this free picnic and party for the people at the end of Wyatt Avenue?
They got the money from sponsors, because that's what we're going to try. That's where we get our money, and we're going to have to acknowledge our sponsors this morning. So go right ahead.
He's so smooth in transitions, isn't he good?
Right back live in the studios here this morning. Your program is Viewpoint, of course. Our guest this morning, historian, former teacher, activist, friend of ours, Bill Thomas, has taken some time to come in and share with us some of the things that they have uncovered in their, I guess it was originally the library basement. They had a kind of a quasi-museum down there. And in the process of moving the museum, we came across all these items that referred to the history of the Klan in this community, which is amazing. And he's holding in his hand, and I'm going to try to get that on the camera here for our folks who watch this program on their computers, the seal, the great seal of the Klan here. And that's a heavy piece of machinery there. And he's going to tell us what that says.
Sure, Bill. And this is actually an item that wasn't in the basement of the library when we were making the move of all the museum collection across the street. But interestingly, there was a lot of publicity at the time about the fact that the museum was moving and it was going to be in a new building and it would be able to display many more artifacts. And I'll never forget the day a woman came to my office and she was holding this seal. And she said, "Here, I think you want this for your collection." And I said, "Well, what is it?" And she said, "Well, it's the official seal of the Logan County Knights of the Ku Klux Klan, chapter number 152. And I about fell out of my chair. And I said, "Where in the world did you get this?" She said, "Oh, my grandfather gave it to me. It's been at home in the kitchen, in the cabinet under the sink for years."
In the cabinet.
Her grandfather was probably a member of the Klan.
Yep.
Well, they still have seals that look just like that at the
sure.
Oh,
courthouse.
yes, it looks like anything you'd see down at the courthouse if you need to have something notarized or whatever. It's about 5 inches tall, and then it's got a handle that sticks up farther, and you press it down. It was all rusted and didn't work when we first got it.
Well, under the sink is a bad place.
Right, and you may know a good friend of mine was Dean May.
Oh, yeah.
Yes,
really.
I knew if one person could get it working again,
he
Dean
did.
May could, and he cleaned it all up, and it now produces the seal again.
It's amazing.
Isn't that? Well, in Bloomington, Illinois, their chapter of the Ku Klux Klan must have been number 71.
Yes.
Because I have here a lovely family portrait that they probably had blown up and put over the fireplace mantle. The mom and the dad and the baby. He looks to be one, no
Right.
more than that. And they're holding this big drum that
Right.
says chapter 71 of the Ku Klux
Let me hold
Klan.
that up for if Jim can get this.
Isn't that special?
It's amazing in that if you just look at that photo, step back a minute, and think about what it tells you. It reinforces that fact that, well, this was just commonplace
Surely it was.
in the 1920s.
Yeah.
In the Midwest. It was commonplace enough that you would want your wife and your child to also be part of it because it stood for good values and 100% Americanism.
And you
So
can never
who
get
wouldn't
too
want
old
that?
to learn. I never knew until this very moment that there was anything except men in the Klan. And here's a lady all dressed under
Yeah.
her sheets.
Let me talk about women for just a minute, Bill,
Yeah.
because that's really interesting too. When I was doing research, especially in the Argus and then a little bit in the Lincoln Evening Courier, one of the places that provided the most information were articles that wrote about the Klan going to the Atlanta Fair. Okay, the
Which was a
Atlanta
big
Fair.
time.
Oh, the Atlanta
In
Fair was a
that time.
huge
That was
deal.
a big deal.
Huge deal up until 1928. Okay, and that's when it closed down. But they would write up, front page articles, multiple page articles about everything that was happening at the fair. Well, here from August 13th, 1926, the headline is KKK at the fair. The Ku Klux Klan, which staged such a successful demonstration the first night of the Atlanta Fair last year, has been granted the privilege of repeating the performance on Tuesday at the fair this year. Great preparations are being made, and large delegations are expected from all over central Illinois. Then they give the lineup of what's going to appear, and here's where it really gets interesting. 1 o'clock to 4:30, racing, vaudeville, and band music. 6:30 to 7 p.m., Clinton WKKK drill team. That stands for Women
Women of the Ku Klux
KKK.
Okay.
9 to 9:15, Lincoln WKKK drill team. Now, the following week, they wrote up another article, and last week's article was announcing this was going to happen. The following week, they wrote up about what it was like. So here's the paragraph in particular about the Lincoln WKKK. The Lincoln ladies team next put on their drill to music by the band. Neatly dressed in their white robes and hoods and carrying flags, they went through numerous formations and figures in a most precise manner. And that's one paragraph out of a full-page article about the Klan's activity at the fair that year.
Was it kind of semi-quasi paramilitary?
You know, it was a thing. This is something else I learned. I did a whole bunch of research because we did a dinner program once on Murphy Hall, you know, the opera house up in Atlanta. From the 1880s through about 1930, you know, because there was no television, radio hardly existed. There were all these other social organizations that you belonged to keep yourself occupied. Where I'm going with is, one of the things they used to have women do was drills, including broom drills. Atlanta had, yes, broom drills. It was close order marching, and you would twirl the brooms and do all sorts of things with it because the...
Well, if you didn't have a rifle.
There you go. The Atlanta Women's Broom Drill Team used to regularly perform at Murphy Hall. So it made sense. Okay, well, how are we going to involve the women in the KKK? Let's let them drill. Okay? And they'll show their support and inclusion in the institution by doing these precise drill formations.
Think of the mindset of folks. Think of the mindset of folks back in that time. That's amazing. It's very, very interesting.
It is.
It was a lot more pervasive than I ever realized.
Yes.
Again, if you're
in the first place, most of us think that was happened below the Mason-Dixon line.
Right. Right. But if you're seeing, it's commonplace for a family to go pose for a family photograph in Bloomington, all in your KKK robes. That shows you how common.
Ingrained it was.
It was. Yeah.
But it's not like being a Mason or an Eastern Star member.
No, there is a qualitative difference.
You've got a lovely picture here from the Atlanta grade school. They're little third graders. I have a great-grandson who's in first grade, so he's that age, and they're all dressed up in uniforms.
Yeah. This one made me catch my breath. For a couple of reasons. Number one, the photograph I'm holding and then the corresponding newspaper article that writes about this photo, so it's confirmed in print, we know this photo is accurate, is from November 11th, 1921. That's the earliest I've been able to find anything in the newspapers about the Klan. Okay, and then the latest goes up to about 1928, 29. So you're talking about pretty much throughout the decade of the 20s is when it was active.
So it wasn't eons at all, was it?
Oh, no. It was a relatively short time, and again, remember, it was a reaction primarily to Catholic and Eastern European immigration and Prohibition. Prohibition started in what? 1920, 1919, somewhere around there?
I don't remember.
Okay.
I didn't have a license to drink at the time.
Well, anyway, it all is in that decade of the 1920s. But here's what's fascinating about this. Again, this is a front page article from the Atlanta Argus, November 11th, 1921. And the title of the article is Atlanta Schools Homecoming. Okay, you know, we still have homecoming.
Sure.
Big fall festival. It was a common thing. I'm sure it was around when Jim was in school there. So they talk about the opening paragraph is very mundane. Atlanta Homecoming Day for the Atlanta schools was celebrated last Friday afternoon and was witnessed by a large crowd. The event was held in connection with the Atlanta-Lincoln football game, and although the locals went down to defeat, they put up a fight that satisfied the homecoming crowd. Okay? I love that.
Yeah.
So, because we know there was a big rivalry between the two.
Pros of the day.
Exactly. But then we go down a couple of paragraphs, and they start talking about the parade that was held that day. At 2 o'clock, which, by the way, is the same time we hold the Fall Festival Parade this very day. Yes, we haven't changed in all those years. At 2 o'clock, the parade was formed, headed by the Atlanta Band, and marched to the business section, and people who were not conversant with the event of the preparations were surprised at Atlanta's all-grade and high school pupils participating, and some excellent effects were obtained. But here's the interesting paragraph. Grades 1 and 2 united, and the boys dressed to represent all the well-known teeny-weeny cartoon characters. Do you remember that cartoon strip, Bill, by any chance? It was around for about 50 years. It was called the Teeny Weenies.
I appeared on the stage of the Lincoln Theater with that became the R Gang comedy later on.
Okay.
Oh.
It was a very, very popular comic strip. So where it's very, this is very mundane. Oh yeah, the first and second graders dressed up like cartoon characters.
Well, Well, not unlike some of the people they dress up as today,
Yes,
the Hulk
exactly.
or somebody.
Just walk through
Exactly.
Walmart, you'll see it every day.
Yep. So that's the way this paragraph starts off. So we've told what the first and second graders did. Then it continues. Grade 3 made a novel showing in uniform Ku Klux Klan costumes. Grade 4 and 5 had a harvest festival theme. So it just keeps on going. And there it is, just that tiny little, not even a complete sentence. And then we have the photo that shows them all standing there with their teacher dressed up as Ku Klux Klan members.
Which indicates to the kids of that time that it was okay.
Well,
Which it
you're in
wasn't.
third grade, you don't know any better.
No, if they
No.
tell you that's what we're going to do, that's what we do.
It's just very commonplace.
Sure.
But
It's
that's a
even
subtlety.
kind of commonplace today to follow the rules. Not entirely, but some form. But isn't that something these little kids, by the time they get to be teenagers, they're thoroughly inculcated in this whole doctrine.
And they think it's okay because
Right.
that's the way that was okay because that's why we started.
Yeah.
So we've talked about how it was prevalent in all these small towns. I could read short articles reporting on, a large group of Lawndale folks went over to Beeson for the Klan meeting. There was a Klan meeting in Lexington. There was a Klan meeting in McLean. All sorts of things. But interestingly, it's when we start talking about the relationship between the Klan in this area and the local churches that I was surprised by a few
Please.
things. Yeah, let me grab.
How do you think the media would have handled that?
Oh, well, they reported on it, is how they handled it.
Yeah.
And here, for example, is an article from December 14th, 1923, and it's titled, Atlanta Klansmen Attend Christian Church Meetings. The services at the Atlanta Christian Church were brought to a dramatic climax Sunday evening when 14 Klansmen in full regalia marched down to the front of the church and presented the pastor with a purse containing $105 with the explanation that the sum should be equally divided among the 3 Protestant churches of Atlanta.
Isn't that interesting?
Well, that was a lot of money.
It was a lot of money in 1923.
But they
Yes.
were very direct in the way that money was to be used.
Yes, the 3 Protestant churches in Atlanta. We, of course, had a Catholic church in Atlanta at that time,
They weren't
too.
getting a share.
Yes. And then, I won't read the rest of this, but then it follows. It says, the gift was accompanied by the following explanatory message. And it's a message from the Knights of the Ku Klux Klan Atlanta chapter. And it, in essence, explains, we're giving you this money because we believe in the good moral work you're doing, and we want to see you continue doing it.
Spelled B-I-G-O-T, bigot.
The other one is from, that was 1923. This is from October 17th, 1924. Headline of the article simply reads, Revival at Eminence Church. Okay? Eminence Church
They still
out west
have
of town.
revivals
Just right on.
here
Oh,
and
yes.
on, yeah.
Yes. Very simple. It just says the revival at the Eminence Christian Church under the leadership of Reverend Dawson is well along in its second week. There has been an accession of interest and increase in attendance that is encouraging to preacher and congregation alike. A good crowd of men attended the splendid lecture Sunday afternoon. Interest was added to the Sunday evening meeting by the attendance of a party of Klansmen who presented Reverend Dawson with a purse of $100 in the name of the Klan. And then they go on to report about what the women were doing at the time the men were meeting.
Probably twirling their brooms.
Yeah,
See,
probably. Probably.
This is so interesting to this old fellow because when I grew up, all we ever thought about was the activity of the Klans, as I said earlier, south of the Mason-Dixon line. I mean, that was very prominent in the Deep South. And no one ever thought, although I was aware of it in later years, but nobody ever thought it was such an active organization up here in the Midwest, so to speak.
Right.
I mean, we're
Right.
This is America.
Now,
Small.
This was a whole different time and a whole different set of thoughts, and it's just hard for us to wrap our minds around this. Now, apparently, the Klan accepted the existence and encouraged the existence of the church.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Yes. Okay. Did the church reciprocate at all, or did they tell the Klan that this is kind of naughty?
I have read nothing that says, for example, it was reported that the money was refused, that the Klan was donating.
You can bet it wasn't.
I'm
Yeah.
sure it wasn't, and I'm sure there were many probably members of the church who were also members of the Klan.
Sure.
Though it was, interestingly, it still was a secretive organization. Okay? You put on the robes so that people would not know that
Right.
you were there.
Well, that
But
was the whole idea.
that was part of the whole idea. But here's something else that I found. Oh my gosh, I couldn't believe this when I learned it. So let's say you're a businessman, or you're even an act that might appear at the Atlanta Fair. How can you, without, lifting the sheets, so to speak, how can you make it known that you're a member of the Klan? Because that's going to garner you some support. Well, when you realize this is what was done, and you start looking at things, especially newspapers back then, you'll see it. And oh my gosh, why didn't I recognize that? And here's what I'm talking about, to cut to the chase.
Okay.
There's an ad from the Atlanta Argus for a place that was a restaurant and confectionery business downtown Atlanta called the Wisteria. It was on the corner of Arch and Vines. It's where Arch Street Artisans shop is right now. Okay, it was in that building. It ran ads regularly in the newspaper. And remember, this is before the days of air conditioning. This is back in the 1920s. But they put in ceiling fans to keep the place
Innovative.
cool. And they wanted to promote that. So their tagline was, the Wisteria, come keep cool. But all three of those words started with the letter K,
KK.
not C.
Oh my gosh. Isn't that the berries?
They just slipped the C out
Yes,
and
sir.
inserted
Yes.
the K.
And then
keep
I was
cool.
looking through, we have a wonderful collection of fair books from the Atlanta Fair. And if you look at the fair books from the 1920s, you'll see that they were booking lots of vaudeville acts, etc., to come and perform at the fair. And one of them was a group of clowns and jugglers. What was their name?
KKK.
Kane's Comedy Clowns.
KKK. Yeah.
Yes, so all of a sudden when you realize that and you start looking at things, it just pops out at you. You see this all over the place. Businessmen and others letting it be known without coming right out and saying it. Oh yeah, I'm a member of the Klan.
Now, the Klan was very active in this area through that whole decade.
Yes.
But was its cessation kind of quick?
Judy, I wish I could say I've done the research and can answer that question. I honestly don't know. I'm guessing, as I mentioned earlier, I think it's because all of a sudden people's minds changed and had to pay attention to what they were dealing with the Depression.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
That makes perfect sense.
When times are prosperous and things are going well, you have time to spend on other things. But after the stock market dropped, you gotta stick to the basics, or you're not going to survive.
The grindstone. You can't be out there making trouble.
Exactly. So we've done the fair, the Atlanta Fair, the churches, businesses. The other place that I thought was interesting that just explained how prevalent this all was, there was a movie theater in downtown Atlanta, right on Vine Street. This is way before Jim's time. It started in 1917. It's not the Palace. This was Louis' main competition. Okay? It was called the Liberty Theater. It started out being called the Gem, and then after the war, they decided to give it a patriotic name, and they called it the Liberty Theater. But anyway, here's the bill of fare that appeared from 1923, December 14th, Atlanta's Liberty Theater. They would, of course, advertise what movies were coming up.
Sure.
Okay.
Friday and Saturday, December 14th and 15th. Matinee, 3 p.m., 10 and 20 cents. Night, 10 and 25 cents. Come see John M. Stahl's great Ku Klux Klan production, One Clear Call. 7 reels of thrilling sensations. then they give the actors, and it says, "You'll see hundreds of night riders in a thunderous quest of vengeance."
And I bet it was well attended.
Will you grab a headset? We have a caller there. All right, let's give Mr. Thomas the time to get that headset on. And go ahead, caller.
Okay, listening, in the beginning it doesn't sound like there was anything about African Americans. Was there an overturn of the KKK to head in that direction? Because it sounds like in the beginning it was all about being pure and good and good for the community.
In the beginning, right after the Civil War, it was definitely an anti-black, anti-African American organization. It then sort of died away in the late 1880s, 90s. It came back in the 1920s, and that's when it was primarily focused on being in favor of prohibition, against Catholics and Eastern European immigrants, and promoting 100% Americanism. That version of the Klan then died away primarily in the 30s, but then it came back with a vengeance when the Civil Rights Movement started. Okay? So it's had three different sort of versions of itself. And now we again have very active Klan members in the country who are right-wing extremists.
Did that help you, caller?
Now?
Yes. Oh, yes.
Yeah. Yep.
Well,
Good question.
Thank you for calling in. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks.
Well, the fact that it morphed from one organization to another until finally it realized this game's over.
Yeah.
Since the idea kind of came up from the South,
Yes.
yes, the Deep South,
Yes.
did the plantation system have any feeding into such an organization and keeping a whole class group of people under your thumb?
Sure. With the first version of the Klan, that was exactly the case. Not so much with the second version, because it was a much more widespread organization across the country. It wasn't just the Deep South. And it was primarily, as I've said, a reaction to all these immigrants coming in who were predominantly Catholic and the whole Prohibition movement. So those things all combined together to create this desire to let's keep America, and keep it pure and moral. That was the primary
And
drive.
that was moral.
Well, we'd
I
like to
see.
stand on that tenet. Let's keep it pure and moral. With as Will Rogers, who was it, said that politicians' babies' diapers ought to be changed for the same reason.
I don't get it, Bill. Can you explain?
Enlarge on that a little bit. Oh, dear heaven.
Bill Thomas, we appreciate you taking your time and the research that you've done. I really enjoyed some of these things that I've heard today. Most of them are brand new to this whole fella.
I don't know. We might do another dinner program on it.
I hope
I think
so.
that'd be interesting because you
Be
get
sure
a lot of
you
questions.
tell us.
Well, we did it before, and we had to, that in 1 year, we did it 3 times because we had so many people wanting
So many
to come.
people wanted to
Yeah,
sit.
so, but that's been 5 years ago or so,
Oh,
so
well,
we might do it again.
Those
Well-
people forgot what they saw. They're coming back.
Bill, we thank you for Viewpoint, and we'll close as we always try to do. Be the reason somebody smiled today. Thank you for Viewpoint.